Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz Interview Series with Kansas City jazz drummer Todd Strait. He was born and raised in Topeka, Kansas, and got into jazz out of sheer curiosity. He was spinning 45s his dad had lying around, big band era things, and the like. He would go on to New York to learn from the best and play with Marian McPartland. From there, he came to Kansas City and jumped into a very fertile and rich scene and played with the likes of Bob Bowman and Karryn Allison. Then he went on to Portland, and now he is back in Kansas City in another thriving scene. He's got some great tales, so dig this interview, my friends.
Thank you for taking a little time out. I appreciate it.
That's my pleasure. Thank you so much.
So I'm going to go ahead and dive right in here and just give me kind of a snapshot of what's been going on lately musically with you.
Lately, musically, it's gotten very, very busy. As I just mentioned, I recently relocated back to Kansas City after, I believe it's been 14 years, hooking up with old friends and new friends and playing a lot around town. Plus, I'm starting to travel again. So I didn't travel for about 6 years after my youngest son was born. And I was a daytime dad, basically, and did some local gigs and a couple trips here and there, but nothing like what it had been previously. So now he's in school, and I'm getting back into work and play. Mostly play, actually.
Nice. Very nice.
Yeah.
So where were you at? Did you go to Topeka?
No, I grew up in Topeka, and after high school, moved to New York City. Stayed there for about 9 years, 10 years. Moved back to Kansas City for about 13, and then the last 14 years or so, I've been in Portland, Oregon.
We'll kind of go through the chronology of everything, but let's go ahead and start off, I guess, in the hyper-local right now. Do you have any recording projects or anything that's in the works, any projects?
Actually, I just did two recently. One just about 3 days ago in Portland with a vocalist from San Francisco named Madeline Eastman. So it was kind of a cool little project. It was my very good friend Randy Porter, who's a phenomenal musician, piano player. He has a recording studio, and he decided to open it up and have kind of a live studio recording. So there was actually about 15 people in the studio just watching it as it happens, which was kind of fun. Very interesting, different kind of a take on it. And they were troopers because, we did 2 takes of every tune and stopped in the middle of a couple of them and nope, it's a wrong chord change or whatever. So, but I think they enjoyed seeing how it's actually put together. And we did the whole thing in about 4 hours. So
wow.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the nice thing is that it was more like a gig, but a gig with more of a purpose than just, playing to the end.
Yeah.
So I've heard some of the roughs of it, and it sounds really good. There's some tweaking to do, of course, but once that's done, it should be pretty nice. And again, with Randy and the same bass player, John Watala, he's from San Francisco, we recorded a few months ago a CD with Nancy King, and who's a phenomenal vocalist from Portland. But she spent years touring with Ray Brown's trio and also spent some time with the group Oregon. And, her history goes way back. I think she's in her mid-70s, late 70s now. And just such an incredible musician, wonderful vocalist. So that's going to be coming out in a couple months, I think. That's a little slower process.
Right on.
So those are the last 2 things,
Very
and
cool.
we'll see what else comes around. Yeah.
Let's get to the beginnings of your life in Topeka. Talk about your childhood. Talk about how you got into music and your family a little bit.
Well, my dad was a piano player, kind of a weekend warrior, and his regular job during the week was with the State Department of Education. And my mother was a teacher and a counselor in elementary schools. But my dad was a big 4 freshman Stan Kenton fan, and I was telling this to somebody else, I remember in 3rd grade I was home with the flu or something, and just so bored, I put on a bunch of these little 45s that he had kind of stacked up in a corner. And it was the 4 freshmen doing stuff like Poinciana and Day by Day and, old folks, stuff like that. And something about it, I just really, really, loved the way that sounded to me. And so then I found some records with the 4 freshmen and Stan Kenton, of course, from my dad's collection. And that got me into the big band thing. And then from there, I just, kind of spread out and found out about a whole other bunch of musicians, big bands and Count Basie and Gene Krupa and Buddy Rich and Louis Bellson, Max Roach and Philly Joe and Elton Jones, Tony, on and on and on. So I started getting really into it probably in middle school, like 7th grade, as far as the drums and music. But I started to really hear it and be interested in it when I was in grade school.
Say, why did the drums make so much sense to you?
Well, I started off wanting to be a trumpet player, and that's what I was going to be. And so I was actually not a bad trumpet player for a little kid. And we lived on a farm out north of Topeka, and at one point, and I just loved to practice in the barn. We had this huge barn full of hay, and I sounded like Clifford Brown in that barn. I mean, big warm sound. Of course, anywhere else I sounded like a balloon with the air being squeezed out of it, But I was going to play trumpet, and then I got braces, and my mouth literally bled when I played, and I couldn't do it. So there was some drums. I was kind of messing around with them anyway in the corner, and picked them up and got way into that. Of course, living on a farm helped because we had no neighbors.
Yeah.
And I could play whenever I wanted to, and it was actually pretty ideal. So I'm glad I chose the drums now because I just love playing drums.
So when you were a kid growing up, after you got kind of baptized in all of this music that you were listening to, and then going from the trumpet to the drums, was it always like the dream to be a musician, or did you just kind of happen to get into that? Were there other dreams, I guess I should say?
No, actually, I went to mentioning Stan Kenton, I went to a Stan Kenton camp, which is, I guess, the predecessor to the Aebersold camps now, just a jazz camp for a week. And I must have been 7th grade, 8th grade, something like that. And the very first night, like every night, the big band did a concert for the students. And this was at Drury University in Springfield, Missouri. I sat there in the front row, and I was so blown away by not only the band, but the drummer. His name is Gary Hobbs, and he's now a good friend of mine. He lives in Vancouver, Washington, which is basically a suburb of Portland. But it just knocked me out so much. I sat there at the end of the concert and thought to myself, I am going to do that. And so I decided then that that's what I was going to do. And everything since then, it's just been, how am I going to keep doing this? It's not like, I never really had any other interests. So for better or for worse. But as far as, something that hit me that strongly, that's when I decided, and kind of unusual, I guess. But
well, no, and the beauty of that, and I hear this a lot in jazz stories. I'm reading the bio of Terry Gibbs right now, and he talked about when he was a boy, and he saw Benny Goodman come up in Carnegie. It may not have been Carnegie, it may have been somewhere else in New York, but he was at a theater, and he came up out of the ground, and he just totally lost his mind. Here's Benny Goodman. Here's the best band. And then later on in life, he spent a long time and had a great relationship, played at his funeral even. And I think about how cool that has to be to have not only a dream realized, but you're with your idol, and you get to hang out and get to know him. That has to be totally cool.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
So, just to reiterate, just to kind of refresh me so I can keep kind of the timeline here. After Topeka, you go to, did you say you went to New York, or did you go to Kansas City?
No, I went to New York. Basically, it was Bridgeport, Connecticut, actually, but that's only 20 miles north of New York City. I went to the University of Bridgeport in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and the other two drummers who were there at the time were Joel Rosenblatt and Dave Weckel, and they were both students. And so they're a couple of years older than me, I guess, but we're basically the same age. And the director of the Jazz Studies department there was Neil Slater, who later went on to direct the 1 O'Clock at North Texas State. He's retired now. But the reason I moved to Bridgeport, Connecticut was because of a drummer named Ed Thope. And I'd heard Ed with Clark Terry and to the Aebersold camps that I attended when I was in high school. And I wanted to study with him. And so that's why I went there. See, Ed taught there. I started to work pretty much right away, and by the end of the first year of school, I was working more than I was going to school. And third semester, I just was like, I think I'm done with school, because I had just gotten a call from Marian McPartland, piano player, and joined her trio, and that was a priority for me over music education.
Yeah,
which I'm not cut out for anyway. So I think I made the right choice. Yeah, so I lived in Connecticut and New York from 1980 until December of 89. And then that's when I moved back to Kansas City.
I have so many good memories of listening to that NPR show with Marian. She just could open up that Pandora's box of jazz. That may be one of the reasons why, I mean, along with obviously getting baptized in Kinda Blue and everything that was so good about that late 50s era, but listening to her talk to all those cats and to bust out that piano rhythm she had was beautiful.
Yeah, no kidding. She was amazing. I mean, she was a total people person. She could talk to anybody, hang out with Dizzy Gillespie or Tony Bennett. I actually saw this, just like old friends and joking around. And then, walking down the hall and there's a guy, cleaning out the bathrooms, and she's stood there and would talk with just like your old friends. I mean, she was really, truly an amazing person, an incredible woman, and a great musician. And I've just been blessed that I had that time with her.
So what did you learn from her? I mean, obviously as a person, she was pretty phenomenal. But what did you learn from her as a musician? That had to be, at that time in your life, coming from Topeka to kind of a culture shock of New York and then being with someone so high profile, that had to be a massive learning curve.
Well, it was I was scared to death most of the time. And, she was old school. She would never really tell me anything. And she'd say, well, your flight at the airport is on American and it leaves at 2:00 and flight numbers are just go and bring a tux. And I wouldn't know if we were going to play a club or if it was a concert or a symphony or a festival, anything. So we'd get to the gig, and this happened the whole time I was with her. She would never write out a set list. We never rehearsed. We never talked about endings, beginning, nothing like that. And I asked her, I said, what are we going to play? She goes, oh, I don't know. You'll hear it. And then I was talking with the bass player early on. I was like, geez, Gary Maserati, did you guys rehearse this stuff? And he goes, no, she likes to do it differently every time. And even when I get used to playing a particular tune in a certain key, she'll just change the key without telling me. It was all, and I've thought about that. It's such a good way to build your reaction, be able to react quickly, and yeah. She was such a master. If it hadn't been for her, most of the stuff I played probably would have sounded just awful, but she was in such control that no matter what I did, she and Gary too made it sound like it was okay.
Right on.
I think that's what I learned from her was just total concentration, at least as much as I can, in the moment, and learning to not think about what just happened because it's too late anyway. Always be right there and ready, and that's I think a valuable lesson,
So what else in New York? That's a pretty big period to be in the epicenter of jazz for the entire world. That's it. So what else in that 14 years between players and experiences really helped to groom you as a musician?
I think some of the things that helped me were to be in an atmosphere of with people who were totally dedicated and really passionate about the music and really, trying to make it the best they could all the time. Before I got there and early on, I'd be playing a wedding in somebody's backyard in the summer and be like, oh, this just sucks. I can't wait till this is over, blah, blah, blah. Well, you never know who's going to be there and you never know who's going to hear it. George Clooney could walk in. Maybe he's related to the bride's sister. You just never know. And I've been in found myself in situations where I was taking it for granted. And then I looked out in the audience and I was like, oh my God, that's Billy Cobham. What's he doing here? Because it's New York City. You know what I mean? I mean, you just don't know. And so then it's kind of like, maybe I should play the best I can no matter what, even if there's only two people, because that person might, pass on that, they heard, this great group to somebody that, could actually help you, and spread the word.
Yeah.
So that's one thing I learned, just being on my own and dealing with circumstances like I just mentioned with Marian. But most of the musicians I played with were older. Like I was always the baby. You know what I mean? So they were decades older than me. Cal Farlow and Barney Kessel. Those guys, of course, they were in their 60s when I was playing with them, and I was 23, I think, 22, something like that. So, everybody was very understanding, forgiving, and I'm sure I made way more mistakes than I even remember, but, I was so, and still am, sincere about trying to make the music the best that it can be. that, you're forgiven some discrepancies or mistakes if you're really, I think, sincere about it.
Absolutely. Well, and I've experienced you firsthand on a number of occasions. Were you there were you with Herman that night that Tavon came in?
No. Let's see. I was with
Phil.
I was at the Green Lady. Yeah, with Phil DeGreg, yeah.
Okay, Phil DeGreg. I got to tell you, and I told Phil this too. I talked to him after the show. I don't know that I've ever been to a show in Kansas City where the crowd was completely in tune with you guys on stage in a way that I haven't. That room was electric. I mean, the storm was going on outside, but there was something going down. And then when Tavon came in, it just added. There was a real good energy. I don't know if you felt that on stage, but it was happening pretty well that night.
Oh, I absolutely felt it. And that's one of those nights that I think we all do this for, is a night like that, where it's really clicking, everybody's, really trying. And you're right, when Tavon came in, he just raised the bandstand to a whole nother level. Everybody really focused, and it was a team. It was a real team effort. And the energy from the audience, like you said, that always helps. It's a two-way street,
Yeah.
You can be playing great music, and if nobody's listening, it's kind of like, eh. But if everybody's on board and with, in the same space, wow. I mean, I just don't know anything that can beat that.
Oh,
that's it. Yeah.
I was bowled over by it. It's been very rare. I've seen a lot of shows locally, but when I left that show, I was like, there was a lot of special feelings with the Charlie Parker week, and Tavon was kind of kicking off his weekly residence here. But it was more than that. And I've never really heard too many people on stage say, like, Phil was very vocal, like, wow, you guys are great. And you hear musicians say that, and I think it's just kind of stage manner, but I think he was genuinely like, wow, this is happening. There's magic going on here. So it was cool, very cool to see.
Yeah, there definitely was that night for sure. I've heard that before in New York with Jim Hall's quartet, and a piano player named Bill Mays did an amazing piano solo, just cadenza with Joe Rocasano's big band at the Blue Notes, and I was there. It was packed, New York City weekend, whatever. And Bill Mays played this solo that brought the entire universe right into that room. I mean,
wow.
Nobody was even breathing. I don't even know how he did it. It was just the most phenomenal thing, and some musicians can do that. I think that night that you're referring to at the Green Lady was similar to that. We were all in it together, and it was a very special night for sure. So
yeah, I loved it. And the one thing, I went the following week and it rained also, and George V. Johnson was there. And I was thinking on the way down, because it was the end of the Charlie Parker week, I was thinking about when he died, there was a peal of thunder over New York City, and they've documented this, and they said that people heard it. It happened when he died. So on the way down, I was thinking about that because I knew a rainstorm was coming in. And while those guys were on stage, a peal of lightning went off, and the electricity went out in the Blue Room, and no one stopped playing. So everything was basic. It was awesome. So everything was acoustic except for George, and he kept singing. And it, like, flickered, and everything stayed off for about 7 seconds, and then it came up, and everybody was kind of looking at each other like, I don't think anybody captured that on film, and no one wanted to, because it was a moment where it was like, wow, this is good living right here. So
yeah,
it was cool. Anyway, I strayed away a little bit, but I want to get back. So after New York City, tell me what happened after that. What brought you away from New York?
Let's see. Well, I moved to Kansas City, and I was just newly married at the time, and my wife then and I started a family. So, and we were here. My timing was really good because Danny Embry and Bob Bowman had just moved back. Karryn and Allison had just moved to town. Kevin Mahogany was starting to work a little bit more around town, and I just was so lucky to kind of fall into some of these groups. So it kind of started with Bob, Danny, and Rod, a group called Interstring, and we, got busy and played a lot and had some good fans, strong following there. And then Karryn started to get busy, and I started to travel with Kevin Mahogany in 1994, 95, and stayed with him for about 5 years. We went all over the world. Kevin and Tyrone Clark, great bassist here in Kansas City, and myself. and a couple guys from New York. And then the thing with Kevin ended, and that's when Karryn started to get busy. And so we started traveling all over the world, with her. And I was also starting to work more and more with Eldar, young piano player. He's in New York now. So, and then he started to travel a bunch. So for about 7 or 8 years, I had 2 full-time gigs with Karryn and Eldar. And I was so lucky because the schedules hardly ever conflicted until it was the 9th or 10th year, and suddenly everything conflicted. So I had to make a choice. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, yeah, but I had like 3 of everything, like 3, shaving kits and 3 suitcases. And there was a couple times, well, more than a couple times where I would come home from one trip and put the suitcase inside the door and pick up the other one that I had packed before I left and took off for the airport to leave again. And it was just pretty nuts there for a while.
Oh, yeah.
That, all was happening when we moved to Portland in 2002. And that continued until about 6 years ago. So the travel was pretty intense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would think you would need a break after that. So how did you actually get to a point of meeting and becoming a regular for Karryn, Allison?
Most of it was just doing gigs around town, here in Kansas City, and developing, the music with her and Bob and Danny and Rod Fleeman too later. But, and as she started to travel, I was open to travel. No rehearsal was needed. We were comfortable. We were friends. That's how it was. Never any kind of plan. It just kind of developed on its own.
Right on. So you traveled the world with her. A lot of people that were involved in this operation, not only fans, but just moving and traveling. Do you have any good stories about touring worldwide with Karryn?
Yeah, tons. Probably I've forgotten most of them. I was just talking with Bob Bowman, my dear friend, and he and I were remembering a trip that we did on the QE2, which is a ocean liner, which is now, I guess, retired. But the trip was from New York to London, and it lasted a week. And it's a jazz cruise. So I was with Karryn and also Annie Ross. I did 2 gigs that week. But the first day out, beautiful. Second day, it got a little stormy. And I think it was the second night or the third day, we hit like we were in a hurricane. It was like a level 9 storm. And they closed, of course, you couldn't go on deck, but they also closed all the windows so you couldn't see out. And if you can imagine, this ship is like 1/4 of a mile long. And I remembered that because they said, if you want to walk a mile, walk around the ship 4 times, that's a mile. So here's this ship. And I mean, the seas were 60, 70 foot waves, I guess, is what I learned later. But I mean, entire rooms would just slowly go up and then lean to the right and go down.
Wow.
And this went all day and all night until we reached London. And it smelled like a vomitorium in there. And, people were taking medicine and people were fainting. And, on the, we tried to play and got some music out. But, I mean, they had to bolt the pianos down and the cymbal stands were falling over. And it was one of the shows I did with Annie Ross. I mean, she wasn't too steady on her feet anyway, but the ship kind of lurched to the left and she lost her balance and almost fell off the stage, and this guy caught her. So they got her up on stage, got a chair for her, and got into the next tune, and then the ship lurched to the right, and the chair actually slid off, started to slide off the stage toward the front. Somebody else jumped up and caught her, and then they called it. It's like, okay, we're done.
Yeah.
But all week like that, and Bob and I would go, try to eat something if we could hold it down, and we're sitting up there in the lunchroom or whatever, and the ship would lurch, and in the kitchen you hear this. All the dishes would be breaking,
Oh my God!
It's like, I mean, and then Bill McLaughlin, he was with us, of course, he was with us a lot, and he was pointing out to us that at one point we were looking at a map on the wall or something. Goes, look, we're 12 miles from where the Titanic sunk, and it was like, yeah, thanks a lot, Bill.
Yeah.
I mean, stuff like that. Anyway, that's one story. I just I could bore you all day with stuff, but that was one that I recently was talking with Bob about, and just it cracks me up every time I think about it.
Yeah, that's a great story for sure.
Yeah.
So you've been around the country. You've seen different jazz scenes. Tell me what the Portland jazz scene is like.
The Portland jazz scene is interesting. It's well, first I'll say, I mean, the quality of musicians there is just incredible. So really world-class players there, just as like in Kansas City. But you know, a lot of the guys are teaching either privately, excuse me, or in schools, or they don't really have to work anymore for whatever reason. So, you know, the cost of living there is quite high. It's basically Kansas City times 2. And the scene itself is it's I think kind of struggling. There's not a whole lot, you know, of music in clubs. And I think a lot of that is due to the culture of the town changing. I mean, Portland's a great town. I love it. It's just beautiful in the Northwest. But, you know, somebody told me recently that this is, you know, Portland is where 20-year-olds go to retire. And a lot of folks are coming from all over the place. But it's got more of a feeling of a sports town now than a music town, to me. So, you know, of course, Nike's based there. Intel is based there. You know, people are moving there in droves because it's so gorgeous. But it's, you know, it just isn't a real high priority, unfortunately. And it's a shame because the talent out there is just ridiculous. My friend Randy Porter, I mentioned, Becky Kilgore is out there. Gino Vanelli lives there. Dave Frischberg lives there. Dave Friesen lives there. I mean, you know, it's something else. So I enjoy going back there. When I was back, I just got back from there last night, and you know, I can be busy while I'm there. But you know, it's different than Kansas City. I think in Kansas City, people support it so openly and freely, and it's got more of a party kind of a feel. And I think in Portland, there's, you know, people are very careful of their territory in a sense. You know? Yeah. So, well, I think it'll turn around for Portland eventually, but right now they're kind of in a valley as far as the town and music goes. You know.
Interesting. Well, you've had the benefit of leaving Kansas City. You know, you've been on both coasts. You've been in pretty big scenes. What has been the benefit of pursuing a jazz career outside of Kansas City?
A lot of it is, for me, is the people I've met and who I'm still in touch with that live all over the world. And also seeing the whole world. I don't know if I certainly could never have afforded to travel on vacation to the places that I've been. But, you know, I've gotten a really good view of I think how people live in different parts of the world. And it's incredible, the differences. But, you know, most people I think we're all kind of the same. You know, if we just boil it right down to basics, we want to, you know, feel respect and give respect, and warmth and love are good, you know. That's everywhere from Brazil to Europe and Switzerland to Japan. Even a year and a half ago I was in Kyrgyzstan with Eldar. We went back into the 3 days there. So Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan. And, you know, people, man, if you know, are open and treat them with respect, I mean, that's a pretty important thing, pretty important lesson.
Yeah, without a doubt. Well, you've had the opportunity in your life to rendezvous with Kansas City. So let me ask you this. Compare the jazz scene today to the way it was 20 years ago.
Well, when I was here in the 90s, it was totally killing. You know, it was really hot, and it feels just like it does now, except that in the 90s, I was one of the 30-year-olds. Now I'm in mid-50s, right? So yeah. I'm one of the old guys now, you know, and, man, these cats, I mean, I hate to start naming names, but I'll name a few with, you know, and I'm going to leave people out, and I certainly don't mean to, but John Kazilamut, Brian Stever, and Herman Mahari, Peter Slam, Matt Billinger. Oh gosh, I could start naming bass player Seth Lee, and, you know, on and on and on. I mean, these guys are just sounding great, and so full of such good, pure energy. And I think they've raised the bar for us old guys, you know. So, I mean, they're really bringing some great stuff to the table. And I think that the music is in the best possible hands with these cats.
Right
so
on.
It just makes me so happy, and I love playing with them. It kicks me to do it sometimes because it takes me out of my comfort zone a little bit, and I like that. And I don't mind sounding bad if I'm really trying, because that's how I'm going to sound better, if I'm really trying. So, and it's cool. I'm old and I don't care.
Right on.
That's kind of a nice thing about, yeah. So I'm going to just keep trying.
That's the beauty of age, for sure.
There you go.
How does your playing vary with different types of groups, or does it?
Yeah, it definitely does. I guess, what I try to do as a drummer is, I'm not really comfortable as a leader or leading the music, but I feel most comfortable as a team player. And when I play with different groups or in groups that I don't know the guys yet, or girls, whoever, I try to find where I can balance best, or be, what does the group need? Does it need, what can I bring to the group that will really help it the most? And so in some situations, like with Eldar, for instance, that trio, I'll play pretty on top of the time. I'll also be busier, play a lot more, interact more, take more chances. With Karryn, when I was doing, in fact, I'd say those two because they're two pretty opposite situations. With Karryn, it's more like, how to put it? It's more fluid. So the time is not going to be exactly perfect. It's going to depend on the mood, and a tune could be totally different tempos depending on the night. Also, you might have to kind of bend and flow in a tune to make it work instead of, being metronomically perfect. And that's good as well, but it doesn't work in some situations. And so, with that group like that, I would be thinking more of a painter, be thinking of like a painter and colors and support instead of interactive. So not that I would play less, but I would just approach it from a different angle.
Yeah.
In a big band, of course, the buck stops with me, and luckily the big bands I've played with mostly are really good, with good lead trumpet players. And man, if that guy is strong, then I'm just couldn't be happier. So, it's just hooking up and dancing with that lead trumpet player, making sure that we're all on the same page. And if there's a discrepancy, then I'll take the reins and insist on what I think is right. And if it's not, then I'll take it. That's my responsibility. But with 18 people, somebody's got to, put their foot down at some point.
Yeah.
So, and that's the drummer. That's what the drummer should do, I think.
Yeah. So let me ask you this: why do you love jazz?
Because it's freedom, but you've got to be responsible. It's freedom with responsibility. So I love jazz because, oh God, that's a huge question. For one thing, it's a language that I love. Just like Portuguese or French or whatever, it's a definite language. Pretty much everybody in the world speaks it in some way, or can at least understand it in some way. To be really good at it, you have to work on it, and it's a daily thing. Whether you actually play your instrument every day or not, you've got to be thinking about it, or aware of it, or listening to it, or something. And when I was young, I used to think about, oh God, I have to practice. What a drag, And then I got past that tipping point where it's like, I can't wait to practice. I still can't wait to practice. And I think about music on the plane last night. Coming here, I'm thinking about, different grooves in my head, and not necessarily of what the drummer did, but what does the bass player do? I'm trying to think about, every aspect of a group, say as a trio, for instance. So I love it for those reasons. Also, for whatever reason, I relate to it really well. There's a lot of music and a lot of tunes, a lot of records that for whatever reason, I heard at a very pivotal point in my life, and I can put that same track on or that same record on and go right back to that point. The high points and the low points,
Yeah.
So it's a real, oh gosh, it's just like a photo album for me. And, right now it feels like a brand new era. So there's a lot of new music coming and a lot of great new things that are happening. I'm very excited to be in Kansas City among, like I mentioned, guys, my old friends and these younger guys, to make some more, put some more pages in this full album.
Absolutely. So what has been one of the nicest things a fan has ever said to you about your music?
Oh, wow. I don't know. I guess one of the things that I take as a high compliment is, one is if someone will sit right next to the drums for the entire gig and not complain that it's too loud, because I'm not a loud drummer. I think but someone who's not afraid to get close to them, or they're open enough to give it a chance to see. Someone else said something to me recently. They weren't overly excited or anything, but they basically said, I really just heard what you were doing, and it was something along those lines. And I thought that's really cool. Thank you. They heard the melody, they heard the chord changes. If I took a solo, they really understood what I was doing, and that's important to me because I want people to understand. I'm not trying to play hide and seek, or I'm not trying to be, too technical or complicated for people to understand. I like when people understand what I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
So that was a nice compliment. I really appreciated that.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to yet another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in New York, Kansas City, Portland, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Todd for his time and all of those stories. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store, or you can go to YouTube, type in Neon Jazz, and for all things Neon Jazz, the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the music, my friends.
Neon Jazz.